Hello, everyone. In this video, we're going to be taking a look at Through the Dragon Glass and the series of biblical allusions that Abraham Merritt employs to reflect on the creation myth of Rak, the Wonder Worker, as recorded in this story. In order to do so, we're going to take a look at four major things. First, we're going to discuss the function of creation myths on a sociological level. Second, we'll look at the allusions to Genesis that are embedded into Rak's creation myth and think about the purpose and value behind Rak's creation narrative as it is recorded here in Abraham Merritt's Through the Dragon Glass. We'll then look at the ways in which Merritt alludes to the book of Revelation. Remember, we talked about Revelation in relation to the Mark of the Beast, discussing how the Mark of the Beast itself is actually a concept drawn from Revelation, and we discussed what the book of Revelation was. And lastly, we'll pull all these threads together into a cohesive argument regarding the use of these references and their implications in the context of Rak and his representation of an artist, somebody who is creating the beautiful. First of all, creation narratives and their function on a sociological or cultural level. Creation narratives or creation myths are stories about the way in which the universe is created. The most famous of these, the one with which most of you would be probably the most familiar, would be the Genesis creation narrative, wherein you have God forming the world in 7 days out of, well, depending on how you interpret it, out of nothing or out of primal chaos. You also have Adam and Eve in the Garden of Eden being deceived by the serpent into eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, the fall of man, the descent into sin, the fall of the world as a consequence of those actions. So what you have there is a creation narrative, and functionally every religion and every culture has its own series of creation narratives or creation myths. These stories that we tell about the way in which the world was formed, the genesis or origin of the gods and of man, and of all those things that we see in the world. They're explanatory narratives that provide context and information so that we can at least attribute some story or some explanation to the things that we see around us. These creation narratives for each individual culture provide us with an understanding of the way in which this culture perceives the world. They're instantiations of the cultural presumptions and values that underlie a nation or its people. It gives you a perspective on how they perceive the universe and the way in which they relate to that universe. It gives definition to the gods, to the purpose of the universe, to the human beings that live within it. Oftentimes, these creation narratives can either be divided up into two categories, or they can include two separate components, cosmogony and theogony. A cosmogony is a narrative that describes the creation of the universe, right? Cosmos, the creation of the cosmos, the creation of the universe. This cosmogony tells us something about the divinities that the people worship, how they create, and what they do in that creation. Tells us something about what these deities are in relation to the universe and in relation to man. For instance, in the Mesopotamian and Sumerian creation narrative, the Enuma Elish, what you have initially are two streams of water, fresh and salt water, and the mingling of chaotic waters creates the universe that we see. And then the world itself that we know, the physical world, is born out of the corpse of a defeated god, functionally. So what you have is a universe wrested from chaos, order taken from chaos, and also taken from the corpse of a defeated foe. So you already see how this culture perceives itself. It glorifies and valorizes the wresting of civilization from chaos by way of violent oppression and violent action. So we see what the culture believes about itself and how it essentially legitimizes its own actions as the Sumerians and the Akkadians behaved. The theogony is the origin of the gods, how the gods came into being. This creation narrative provides an origin story for a particular people or a particular nation, and it reflects their values, their cultures, and their moral norms. It defines sacred objects or places for this people. One of the things that often becomes true in the discussion or the analysis of creation narratives is that which was recognized by Xenophanes, a Greek philosopher from around the year 600-500 BC. He said that the Ethiops say that their gods are flat-nosed and black, while the Thracians say that theirs have blue eyes and red hair. Yet if cattle or horses or lions has hands and could draw, and could sculpt like men, then the horses would draw their gods like horses, and cattle like cattle, and each of them would shape bodies of their gods in the likeness, each kind of their own. So What Xenophanes is saying here is an arguable point, depending on what your particular religious beliefs are. But he's saying that in the end, each civilization constructs the deity of its creation narrative in accordance with its own perception of the world. So the god that they create, or the gods that they create, become reflections of their own cultural values. And those gods are anthropomorphized. They tend to look like, right, physically, morally, spiritually, mentally, like the culture and the individuals in that culture that produce them. Now, we have in this story, through the dragon glass, a kind of quasi-creation narrative. What I'd like you to do is to think about this creation narrative in the terms that we've discussed already. Herndon tells the legend of Rack's creation of his own world outside of our own, the world that exists on the other side of the dragon glass. I'd like you to look at the imagery of that passage and the actions of the creator God. What kind of associations are provoked here? What do you think of, or what associations, what allusions might be here? What does the creation myth tell us about Rack as a god and as a character? Right? If a creation myth is a reflection of the culture and a reflection of the god and the perspectives of the god and the nature of the god, then what do we have here? Who is Rack? What is Rack privilege? What kind of values are embedded in this creation narrative as they would be in other creation narratives? What I'd recommend that you do is take a look at the link to Genesis 2 and 3 that is posted in the description of this video. Read through Genesis 2 and 3. Think about the values that are embedded in that creation narrative, what it's saying about God, humanity, our position in the world, and more. And then see if you can make some connections between that and this creation narrative. So you have two things to really think about. First, what are the moral lessons, the values, the beliefs, and presumptions of Rack's creation story? And second, how can we compare that to the Genesis creation narrative? Pause the video, take about 10 minutes to think about that, and then when you come back, I will unpack a few things. Now, in response to both of these questions, tying both of them together, the allusions or the connections to Genesis, and also the values that are embodied in this creation narrative, we have Rack going outside the world to create his own domain and fence it off with clouds. So he is delineating his realm and everything that exists outside of it. There's this strong sense of boundaries and borderlines. Okay? He builds a city upon a mountain. So this is a man or a deity that is fixated on artifice and creation. It's unlike Genesis, say, where there is no city, right? There is only the garden. At the center of his creation here, Rack is developing a city. So the process of creation of artifice and the like are central to his conception as a deity and central to his focus, his objectives. Yet surrounding that city are gardens, many things placed within them. Within those gardens, he places many things, some good and some very ... ellipsis terrible. Now, that idea of creation of gardens in the context of a creation narrative or a creation myth, and there being the good and the terrible aligned with it. Right? Genesis continues to repeat this idea of the garden and the things being placed within it being very good. Right? So you do have this strange parallelism between the creation of garden and very good, yet there is also something terrible that is placed within it by Rack. There's something disturbing and distressing. It's not entirely perfect. We have a series of allusions to, well, the Hebrew God or the God of Christianity or the Abrahamic religions by way of this continual reference to the number 7. The number 7 is associated with the Hebrew, Christian, Abrahamic deity, God, because it is the number of perfection. And so when you see God being referenced, you'll see him connected typically to the number 7 or various different multiples of 7 to represent his manifest perfections or the perfection of perfections. The number 6, incidentally, is the number of man because it is, well, off perfect. It is less than perfect. So one of the reasons why you have the mark of the beasts and the number of the mark of the beast being 666 is because it's a reflection of the imperfection of man. That's one possible interpretation. It's just an aside. And of course, you also have the 7 creation days, right? At the close or close to the close of this creation narrative, you have the crowning achievement. Atop the mountain's brow, he set 7 moons for a diadem. A diadem is a crown. Now, in the Genesis creation account, you have man being created on the sixth day, right? The six being the number of man again. Man, humanity, crowns God's creation, right? They're the only creatures in that creation that reflect the divine image, right? God breathes life directly into Adam's lungs, and man becomes a living soul. So human beings who have dominion over nature, who have dominion over all other things in creation, are this capstone achievement on creation. It is as if everything in creation was coming up towards man, or was building towards the final revelation of man. And then God rests to seal that seventh day as holy, again emphasizing the distinction that is being drawn between 7 and 6, God and man. Now, what we have here, though, is Rak crowning his work with these 7 crowns. Again, it is that work of artifice, the diadem, that sits above his creation. So that crowning achievement is the work itself in its totality. Through that last act of creation, the 7 moons that are the diadems for his creation that he crowns, the crowning act of his creation, he is demonstrating that his fixation, his focus, is on the creative act itself and the beauty that he can produce, the work that he can produce. That is what is of true interest to him, and that is what he is glorifying. Now, keep these parallels about the allusions to Genesis and the connections between these two creation myths in mind as we move on to unpack some allusions to the book of Revelation. So Genesis, that first book of the Bible, Revelation, the final book of the Bible, the Christian Bible. Abraham Merritt is alluding to both of them. One thing to keep in mind, though, is that this story is rife with allusions to dragons, serpents, right? So inside the context of this story, we also have this sort of series of allusions, perhaps, to the serpent in Genesis 3. Keep that in mind. Revelation 12. Revelation 12 describes in appropriate or typical apocalyptic imagery that helps to define that book a kind of war in heaven. We're going to unpack that a little bit. But the allusion to it in Through the Dragon Glass comes near the end as Herndon is chased out of Rak's universe or Rak's world on the other side of the dragon glass by a hideous, monstrous creature, a dragon. And he says of this dragon, "It was like the winged beast of the apocalypse that is to bear that woman arrayed in purple and scarlet. It was beautiful even in its horror. It closed its scarlet and golden wings, and its long gleaming body shot at me like a monstrous spear." Now, this passage, the beast or the winged beast of the apocalypse that is to bear the woman arrayed in purple and scarlet, is an allusion to Revelation 12. And we're going to read through part of that chapter of Revelation in order to see what Abraham Merritt is trying to do here. Revelation 12, 1 through 5 reads thusly. "And there appeared a great wonder in heaven, a woman clothed with the sun and the moon under her feet, and upon her head a crown of 12 stars. And she being with child cried, travailing in birth, and pain to be delivered." So we have this typical symbolic imagery of a wonder appearing in heaven, a woman about to give birth. "And there appeared another wonder in heaven. Behold, a great red dragon having 7 heads and 10 horns, and 7 crowns upon his head." Think back, we have the 7 crowns or the 7 moons that serve as diadems for Rak's creation. And now one of his creations, this fantastical dragon that attacks Herndon, is being compared directly to this great red dragon with 7 heads and 10 horns and 7 crowns upon his head. "And his tail drew the third part of the stars of heaven, and did cast them to the earth. And the dragon stood before the woman which was ready to be delivered, for to devour her child as soon as it was born." Now, we don't need to unpack the specific meanings of the symbolic and allegorical language being employed in Revelation here. There are a number of different interpretations depending on your particular eschatology, whether you're premillennial, postmillennial, and the like. But you don't need to worry about that. All you need to know is that Merritt is alluding to this passage from Revelation about this great dragon, this great beast that appears to consume the child of this woman. The story here, this symbolic, allegorical, prophetic story, continues. "The woman brought forth a man-child," so she gives birth to a male child, "who is to rule all nations with a rod of iron. And her child was caught up unto God and to his throne. And the woman fled into the wilderness, where she had the place prepared of God, that they should feed her there 1,260 days. And there was war in heaven. Michael and his angels fought against the dragon, and the dragon fought and his angels, and prevailed not. Neither was their place found any more in heaven. And the great dragon was cast out, that old serpent called the devil and Satan, which deceiveth the whole world. He was cast out into the earth, and his angels were cast out with him. So here we see the connection that is made explicit by the author of Revelation between the vision that he purports to have had and the creation narrative at the very beginning of the Bible. So the Alpha and the Omega, the beginning and the end of the Bible here. We have the revelation, let's say, that the dragon in this chapter of Revelation is the serpent of old, the devil, Satan. So the serpent of old, the serpent in the Garden of Eden that deceived Adam and Eve, is this dragon, is the devil, is Satan. Okay. So the dragon, or the monster that is produced by Rak, the god who has gone through this creative process and is paralleled with the god in the creation narrative of Genesis, has created the dragon, has created this monster that itself, by way of allusion to Revelation, is, well, like Satan. What does all this mean? What is the purpose behind all these different allusions to Genesis and Revelation and this webwork of connections? This allusion to the book of Revelation and the dragon from this story is a way of illustrating that Rak is connected to Satan himself. Rak is both creator and destroyer. Right? The god, or the god of this creation narrative, is both the being that brings beauty into existence and the one who despoils it. Just as the creature itself is a beautiful, shining horror. They seem incongruous, they seem contradictory, that something horrifying can't be beautiful. They are polar in their opposition. But Rak is both the creator of the thing that was beautiful, right, just as God is the creator of the things that are beautiful in the garden, and the one who, ironically or paradoxically, destroys it, just as Satan comes into the perfect garden and corrupts it by inducing the fall of man. What Merritt is saying by way of these allusions, framing them in the context of the quest to create beauty, the quest to obtain beauty and to produce it on the part of Rak, is that the one who seeks to create beauty is also the one who destroys it. By taking these elusive fantasies, these visions that we see within our mind that transcend any mortal and physical instantiation, and trying to force them into reality, try to render our ideas about beauty and our the ephemeral sensations of beauty that we have racing about in our minds, our dreams and our visions, the phantasmagoria that we encounter inside our own minds. By taking those things and trying to render them real, by trying to produce something physical that can reflect them, we are the ones who actually destroy that beauty. We are both the creator and the despoiler, as every artist and as Rak is. The monster then that hunts down Herndon and seeks to destroy him because it is a beautiful, shining horror is the symbolic representation of the connection in the weird tale of beauty and horror. It's exactly what Lovecraft said about the weird tale, that in writing the weird tale, he seeks to be an amplifier and a painter of mood images. He tries to go beyond the normal, boring, prosaic, mundane, everyday world in order to escape into a realm of fantasy. But the only way in which he can do so is by grappling with those most malign conceptions of the human brain, the terrifying suspension of the laws of nature that are our only fixed defense against, well, the unplumbed realms of chaos and the demons therein. The act of actually putting to paper the visions that we have of beauty inspires the destruction of those things. And the only way that we can gesture towards the feelings inspired by those images racing around in our mind, by the beauty that we seek forever to capture but are never able to do so, the results of that is, in the end, the creation of something disturbing. Beauty and terror, awe and wonder and terror, or dread, are just one hair's breadth away. They're not polar opposites. They're, in fact, almost coeval experiences, almost indistinguishable complements rather than opposites. And oftentimes, the quest to produce or to grab hold of beauty and awe and wonder leads us to the creation of something terrifying. In the case of Lovecraft, again, that's exactly what he recognized. He said, I want to experience something beautiful, something transcendent. but I can't. I can't grab hold of it. The closest thing that I can do to experience that beauty and that wonder is to create something terrible. Because that too, in a very similar way, takes me outside of the normal, takes me outside of the mundane. And it satisfies or satiates many of the same desires. So the weird tale and the work of profound beauty we see recorded in symbolic terms and elusive terms inside this story and explicitly in Lovecraft's reflections on the matter are, well, really almost one and the same thing.